In Queensland from tomorrow, you can go for a drive within 50 k's of your home. And here in the ACT, we are technically coronavirus free. And suggestions have been made that the gathering restrictions that are at 2 people at the moment could be lifted to 10 within days.
The US, however, is a different story. Despite warnings from public health experts, about half of states are pressing ahead with plans to ease restrictions on businesses and social life. The enormous pressure on states to reopen has been highlighted by data showing 30 million people have sought unemployment benefits since the middle of March. In an interview with NBC, the White House's health advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has warned states not to move too fast.
You can't just leap over things and get into a situation where you're really tempting a rebound. That's the thing I get concerned about. I hope they don't do that.
Dr. Anthony Fauci speaking to NBC. Germany is to further ease coronavirus restrictions by reopening museums, galleries, zoos and playgrounds and allowing religious services to resume. Some German states have already allowed some of these activities to restart, but distancing restrictions will remain. Deutsche Welle's Nina Haas reports.
Chancellor Angela Merkel defended a step-by-step approach as she outlined details of the latest easing of restrictions in Germany following a virtual meeting with the 16 state premiers.
I'm strongly convinced we can best work in the interest of business, but also of social contacts if we focus on taking small steps towards allowing more contacts, but if we don't have to take steps back. And that's why we have to stay careful and have to adhere to measures of hygiene.
Under the new rules, religious gatherings are allowed again, provided hygiene and distancing requirements are met in churches, synagogues and mosques. Visits to zoos, museums and memorials will also be possible again under the same requirements. Intensive care units and hospitals will start receiving non-COVID-19 patients again, and playgrounds can reopen as early as this week. But 2 decisions were postponed for now. One, should Germany's Bundesliga soccer league resume its season with games behind closed doors? And 2, just which requirements need to be met before schools and childcare facilities can reopen gradually. Angela Merkel said it was important to get a clearer idea of the impact of the first steps to ease the lockdown 2 weeks ago before deciding on the next steps, and that will happen next Wednesday.
Nina Haas reporting. Pilots at the German airline Lufthansa have offered to accept a pay cut of up to 45% for 2 years to help safeguard the future of the company. The union says the concession being offered is worth around €350 million. In return, it wants a guarantee jobs will be preserved. Lufthansa chief executive recently said the company was losing €1 million per hour. Staying with airlines, and British Airways has told staff it might not restart its operations from Gatwick Airport even after the pandemic passes. On Tuesday, BA said it was set to cut up to 12,000 jobs from its 42,000 strong workforce. Some good news out of South Korea. It has recorded no new domestic cases of COVID-19 for the first time in 2 months. It's a major milestone for the country, which was once among the world's biggest coronavirus hotspots. The achievement is made more remarkable given the government did not enforce a strict lockdown. The BBC's South Korea correspondent, Laura Bicker, says the country was well prepared for the pandemic.
Huge milestone here in South Korea, and as a journalist who's followed this right from the beginning, even saying the words 0 cases feels great. When it came to preparedness for this pandemic, South Korea was ahead of the curve. It saw the danger, it saw the threat, it had a test ready and a number of labs, nearly 100 labs ready to process those tests within a matter of weeks. It had the capacity to test up to 20,000 people a day within weeks of the first case on January the 20th. Now, those testing facilities have been key. Over 600 set up across the country. They got creative. They were the first to create drive-thrus. They had these fancy phone booth style testing, which kept each staff member protected. And then they did a lot of contact tracing. It's very aggressive. They used your phone records, your bank records. So once you were confirmed with the virus, they would trace where you had been over the 5 days before you were confirmed. That information was sent out as emergency text alert to anybody who'd been in that area.
The BBC's Laura Bicker. The top US spy agency says the nation's intelligence community has concluded the coronavirus was not man-made or genetically modified. The unusual announcement coincides with attempts by President Trump to seek ammunition to blame China for the pandemic. The statement from the Office of Director of National Intelligence goes on to say that they're still trying to figure out if the pandemic began through contact with infected animals or at a laboratory in the Chinese city of Wuhan. Here's the BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher.
First of all, I would say that Mr. Trump has wavered in the past months over whether to blame China for the coronavirus disaster. His national security officials have been quite consistent in doing so, but he has gone back and forth. But in the past week, we've seen him become much tougher. He's now talking more forcefully about this lab theory. He's also actually accused the Chinese of trying to make him lose the election. He's now talking about making them pay for the coronavirus disaster, punish them in some way. And this also all coincides with an election campaign put together by his political allies that are blaming his opponent, Joe Biden, for being soft on China. So China is becoming an election issue, and there is many critics who say that one of the reasons it is because the Trump administration wants to deflect attention from mistakes he might have had in handling the pandemic, but also because he was hoping to run on the booming economy, and that economy has tanked. So he's changing the topic, so to speak. Also, I should say polls do show that there's quite a high distrust of China right now in the United States. So it's presumably something that the Republicans, but also Mr. Biden's campaign team, feel it concerns voters.
Barbara Plett-Usher reporting. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has shrugged off the latest figures on the coronavirus situation in his country. When asked by reporters yesterday about the record 474 deaths the day before, he replied, "So what?" Brazil is the 9th worst affected nation in terms of coronavirus deaths, with 5,500 so far. Since Brazil confirmed its first coronavirus case in late February, Mr. Bolsonaro has continually minimised the pandemic, rejecting what he calls media hysteria over its dangers. Officially, there are just over 600 cases of the coronavirus in Somalia, but the Red Cross says the true number is probably much higher, and there are likely to be many more new infections in the next few weeks. Somalia has suffered from 3 decades of conflict, and its healthcare system is badly under-resourced. The BBC's Africa regional editor, Mary Harper, has more.
I'm often on the phone to Somalia, and I've been told all sorts of stories about senior people in government being sick, about grave diggers not being able to, with the number of bodies, that it just seems that the situation is probably worse than what we're being led to believe according to the official statistics. And also regional officials are saying that it's not just in the capital Mogadishu where it's a problem, it's also gone to other towns, which suggests that it isn't just people coming from the diaspora who are bringing it, it's cross-infecting people within the country. Yeah, I mean, Somalia has been quite strict in terms of imposing a curfew, trying to encourage people to keep 2 meters apart, etc. So it has quite a lot of effective messaging going on. But the problem is you have millions of people who are displaced or otherwise living in very, very cramped conditions. I mean, if you look at these camps for the displaced people live literally on top of each other. They are crammed in. They have to queue for hours just to get water from a pipe. So how are they going to be able to wash their hands? Often they don't have soap, and they live in such crowded conditions. It's just impossible for them to protect themselves in any meaningful way at all.
Mary Harper there. France is planning to sell off some of the nation's furniture collection to raise extra money for its hospitals and health workers. According to French media reports, around 100 objects dating from the 19th century are to be sold. An auction will take place on France's Heritage Days on the weekend of the 20th and 21st of September. A list is being drawn up of furniture that had little heritage value and had not been used by anyone significant. And that's World Watch. Back to you, Marnie.
Thanks, Annabelle. And that's Midday Report, Te Pūrongo o Te Pautūtanga, for today, Friday, May the 1st. The daily COVID-19 briefing will be broadcast live here on RNZ shortly after 1. Stay with us. Join us again on Monday, but for now, from the Midday team, hei a te rawaki, kia haumaru tonu te noho.
RNZ News at 1 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Cynthia Morahan. 3 workers at Waitakere Hospital who cared for people infected with COVID-19 from St Margaret's Hospital and Rest Home have tested positive for the disease. The Waitemata District Health Board says it's not clear whether contact with those patients was the source of the staff contracting COVID-19 or whether any of the cases are linked. It says full protective equipment was made available and worn by staff at all times in the ward. An urgent review is underway to understand how and where the infection may have occurred. Contact tracing of staff and patients is also underway. A number of staff had been stood down as a precaution and are self-isolating. Affected areas at Waitakere Hospital have been closed to further admissions. In Labour's latest internal poll leaked to RNZ, the National Party is on 29%, with Labour on 55%. In February, the News Hub Reid research poll had National on 43%, with Labour on 42%. A week later, the One News Colmar Brunton had National on 46%, with Labour on 41%. The leaked poll shows a big jump for Labour, which will have been driven by the Prime Minister's role in the COVID response, with Labour on 55% and National dropping to 29%. It's polled the Greens at 6%, New Zealand First on 5% and ACT on 3%. The government is to provide interest-free loans for a year to small businesses affected by COVID-19. The Small Business Cash Flow Loan Scheme will provide assistance of up to $100,000 to firms employing 50 or fewer full-time employees. The Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the loans will be interest-free if they are paid back within a year. And then the interest rate will be 3% for a maximum term of 5 years, and repayments are not required for the first 2 years. Inland Revenue will be taking applications from May the 12th. Legal cannabis would be introduced in phases in New Zealand if approved in this year's planned referendum, with the plant and seeds to come first. The final legislation says only fresh or dried cannabis and seeds will be immediately approved for production and sale under the new regime. Edible products will be considered later, but beverages and gummy bears will be banned outright. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says people will have more freedom in their own homes. South Korea has reported no new domestic cases of the coronavirus for the first time in more than 2 months. It did record 4 new cases, but all were people coming from abroad who were diagnosed and isolated on arrival. South Korea was once among the world's biggest virus hotspots. It adopted an aggressive contact tracing program, finding people who had interacted with a confirmed case, isolating and testing them too. West Coast mayors are calling for a relaxation of the lockdown rules in the region. The West Coast DHB area has no current active cases of COVID-19 and no new cases.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Greetings everybody, welcome to Friday's press conference, day 4 of Alert Level 3. I will hand over first to the Director of Public Health, Dr. Caroline McElnay.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Today we have 3 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 to report. 1 case is linked to overseas travel, 1 is linked to a known case and still being investigated, and 1 is still under investigation. This means our total confirmed cases is 1,132 and total probable cases 347. That brings our current total of confirmed and probable cases in New Zealand to 1,479. I'm pleased to say that there are no new COVID-19 deaths to report. Yesterday, our laboratories completed 5,328 tests, bringing the total number of tests completed to date to 139,898. We have 1,252 cases that are reported as having recovered from COVID-19, which is an increase of 11 from yesterday. And so 85% of all our confirmed and probable cases are considered to be recovered. There are 6 people in hospital today, and none of those 6 are in intensive care. There are still 16 significant clusters, One has had no cases notified in 28-day period, and that is considered to be closed. We expect to close another cluster tomorrow, and we have a further 6 clusters where the last case was reported between 14 and 28 days ago, so we expect to be able to close those off in the next few days. I just want to talk about the press release which was issued by Waitemata earlier today. So Waitemata District Health Board this morning issued a media statement on 3 staff members who have tested positive for COVID-19. One of those was tested and was positive at the weekend. One was included in yesterday's tally, and one is included in today's count. The staff had worked on a ward where patients from St Margaret's Hospital and Rest Home were transferred due to staffing shortages at that facility. I have spoken to DHB Deputy Chief Executive Dr. Andrew Brandt, and he has assured me that they have taken all appropriate actions to minimise any potential risks to patients and staff. The source of staff contracting COVID-19 remains under investigation. Full PPE was available and worn by staff at all times in the area where the St Margaret's patients are being cared for. A review is in progress to understand how and where the infection may have occurred. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. McElnay. I want to cover 3 things today around enforcement, the winter energy payment and the small business cash flow loan scheme. Firstly, on enforcement, an update of our ongoing enforcement under Alert Level 3 rules. It is paramount that we do not lose our hard-won health gains as we move to reboot our economy. Today I can update you that there have been a total of 281 breaches of the CDM or Health Acts under Alert Level 3, and that's an increase of 96 in the past 24 hours. Of those 281, 77 people have been prosecuted, an increase of 31 in the past 24 hours. 180 warnings have been issued, an increase of 61 in the past 24 hours, and there have been 24 youth referrals, an increase of 4 in the past 24 hours. There have been 2,064 police assurance patrols over the past 2 days, alongside 2,790 crime prevention patrols in neighbourhoods and business districts. The increases in these numbers are an indication that the police are stepping up their enforcement response, and this will continue over the weekend. I want to make clear that most New Zealanders are indeed doing the right thing, and that this is actually reflected in the number of people calling out those who are doing the wrong thing. There have been a total of 2,101 reports from members of the public at Level 3, 991 of those about businesses, and 785 about individuals, 325 about mass gatherings. These are being followed up. And as we head into the weekend, there is a particular example that I want to highlight. As part of these reports by members of the public, there has been an increase in reports about parties at residential addresses that clearly include people beyond that person's bubble. I have 2 clear messages for anyone considering that. First, cancel your plans now. Secondly, be aware that the police will be particularly taking a dim view of this activity as part of their Level 3 enforcement activity this weekend. We know that events where there have been gatherings such as parties have been at the root of a number of our clusters. The virus has proven it will spread easily at events like this. Any uptick in cases as a result of parties will mean that we have to stay in Level 3 longer. So please, don't be an idiot. Stick to your bubble and everyone will be better off. I want to mention the winter energy payment today. From today, this payment runs for 4 months as it has since 2018. For this year, the government has doubled the 2020 winter energy payment to support our older and low-income New Zealanders. This year it comes to $1,400 for couples and $900 for a single person. People will see this additional money in their next payment from MSD. There's 2 reasons that we made the decision to double the payment. At a time when we're asking people to stay at home in their bubbles and keep well, our role is to provide support for our most vulnerable to stay warm and healthy and reduce any unnecessary burden on health services. We also know that those on lower incomes are more likely to spend that extra income on basic household needs, and so we know that this doubling of the winter energy payment will provide an immediate stimulus to local economies across the country as we are rebooting the economy. Today, we are also announcing further measures as part of our significant support package for businesses to boost cash flow and protect jobs and incomes. To date, the government has acted quickly to put in place business support, such as the $10.5 billion wage subsidy, the large package of business tax support, and the business finance guarantee scheme that we're delivering in partnership with banks. We've also been making sure that this support gets out the door to our business, workers and economy as soon as possible, and indeed faster than in many other countries. Today, we are adding to that. We have announced that the government will provide interest-free loans for a year to small and medium-sized businesses impacted by COVID-19 to support their immediate cash flow needs and meet fixed costs. Businesses with 50 or fewer employees will be able to apply to the Inland Revenue Department for loans from the 12th of May. This is a 100% government lending scheme to support our SMEs. We're backing these businesses because we know how important they are to our economy. We also know that our small and medium enterprises have not been able to access the support that they need from other sources. The scheme will provide $10,000 to every firm and in addition $1,800 per equivalent full-time employee. The scheme has a maximum term of 5 years. Repayments of principal and interest are not required for the first 2 years. The interest rate will be 3%, but as noted, the loans will be interest-free if they are paid back within a year. The eligibility criteria are the same as for the wage subsidy scheme, but businesses will also have to declare that they are a viable business and that they will use the money for core business operating costs. There will be an audit process led by IRD. This support is available to help more than 400,000 businesses who have 50 or fewer employees. It's designed to get immediate support and help to our smaller businesses to cover costs like rent and other bills. It sits alongside the business finance guarantee scheme that we put in place with banks for medium-sized businesses. Today, I can also announce that we are making a number of updates to this scheme based on the feedback we've had. This includes removing the government's requirement for a general security agreement and making the scheme more flexible by not requiring customers to have drawn down all existing facilities before applying. We are considering further changes to that scheme as well to ensure it plays its part in supporting our businesses. Taken together, the wage subsidy, the business loan guarantee scheme, the significant packages of tax changes, and the support through the small business loan scheme, we have a significant package to cushion the blow of COVID-19 for businesses, to protect jobs, and put New Zealand's economy on a footing to get going again off the back of the amazing work that New Zealanders have all done to stamp out COVID-19 and get a head start for our economic recovery. Finally, the Prime Minister in her press conferences this week has finished by talking about slices of Kiwi ingenuity that we're seeing in Alert Level 3 as we find new ways of working while making sure we stay on course for our health response. Today, I'd like to add one that's close to my heart as the Associate Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage. Our arts sector has suffered an intense blow as we fight COVID-19, as have others around the world, seen through the cancellation and postponement of Cannes Festival or the New York Tribeca Festival. So this year in New Zealand, we are bringing our art house to your house. The New Zealand International Film Festival is this year presenting its program online for the very first time. From the 24th of July to the 2nd of August, the world-class curated program of world and New Zealand films can be screened at home. The joy, inspiration and connection these festivals bring us will be missed by many. But now we have a creative solution befitting of our cultural sector and one that is well worthy of our support. Happy to take your questions.
How can you take the word of the Waitemata DHB when they say that they're doing everything they can to minimise infection when 3 staff members have been infected with coronavirus?
So Waitemata DHB have given me some details today around the investigations that they're undertaking. They launched extensive investigations after the first case was reported. They have been doing a significant amount of testing of both staff and patients. The 2 further cases that have developed since then has added to that intensity of swabbing that is underway, and their investigations are still in progress, and they have that includes patients as well as staff.
How can you take them at their word that they're doing everything they can to minimise infection when they have 3 staff members who have been infected?
Well, because they're investigating it thoroughly, and the staff who were infected, we still don't know the source of that infection, but the DHB has assured me that the staff were wearing PPE when they had any dealings with any of the COVID-19 residents who had been transferred to that ward.
What roles were those staff in? Are they flexi nurses, perhaps, who are working between a ward that has COVID patients and other wards within the hospital?
I don't have the details of their exact roles that they had. But the DHB has investigated where they were working and what their possible contact was with any of the patients, and have ensured that PPE was worn. And obviously this is why they really need to investigate this fully, to make sure that there are no possible breaches of any PPE. We really want that assurance.
And just to be absolutely clear, that obviously this is a hospital that's been dealing with the transferred patients from the St Margaret's Rest Home. We have assurances that the staff involved have all been wearing PPE, but this is why we have to continue to investigate these matters, but also be aware, as we've said a number of times, that unfortunately PPE is not completely foolproof, and so we have to be taking extra vigilance. I'm sure that's the outcome we'll get. Yes.
How is government back loans necessary when we already have the business finance here in TDCM? Is it the case that banks aren't getting money out the door fast enough?
I think for small and medium enterprises in particular, there are quite specific issues. I mean, many of the small businesses in New Zealand are actually based upon individuals. The capital that's in the business has actually been created off the back of perhaps their own house or their own savings, and those people can't always get the support that they need from a bank. So this is a scheme that's designed specifically for small and medium enterprises. We believe it's a scheme that will be welcomed because it will give instant access to cash flow, to the working capital that's needed to support these businesses through the situation. The Business Finance Guarantee Scheme, we are continuing, as I said, to tweak the criteria of that and to work with the banks to ensure that it does play its part. But when it comes to these SMEs, we think this kind of bespoke scheme delivered directly by the government will mean that they'll get the cash flow they need. We'll just take the follow-up.
The tourism industry is really keen for domestic travel to be included under level 2. Is that something the government will relook at?
As the Prime Minister said yesterday, we're still finalising what will happen under level 2 within some of those specific areas. Quite clearly, under level 2, we want to be limiting around things like mass gatherings in particular, but we have to look again at the detail of what's required for travel, how we can make sure that that travel remains safe and doesn't become a vector for further infection. So that work's underway at the moment to see what can be done under level 2. Thomas.
Robertson, why are there 2 different versions of the bill that passed yesterday, one with the loan scheme in it and one without? And why was the one with the loan scheme tabled when it wasn't announced in the press release?
Yeah, so look, what happened yesterday was that the bill that was put out by the Parliamentary Council Office and was tabled in the House was incorrect. The Parliamentary Council's Office have apologised for that. It was always the intention of the government to be able to bring this scheme forward, and all the legislation did was create the enabling framework for that. I think what's really important here is today we've got a scheme that will put money in the pockets of those small and medium enterprises to meet their fixed costs, and I'm sure they'll welcome it.
So does that make you regret the speed with which Parliament was working? Because, in essence, because of that small error by a small part of Parliament, Parliament has now passed the wrong piece of legislation.
Well, I wouldn't actually characterise the legislation that way. This is something that we always intended to do. The legislation simply created the enabling framework for that. But to your initial point, look, there is a lot of being done with a great deal of speed at the moment. From time to time there'll be a mistake. This was a mistake, a genuine one. The Parliamentary Council Office have apologised for that. The good news is that actually the scheme is getting out there now and getting money to the business people who need it.
Minister, how will the IRD assess credit risk, and will the IRD be beefed up with more people to assess how viable these businesses are?
We're certainly going to be providing more support to Inland Revenue to be able to deliver this scheme. I mean, fairly obviously, Inland Revenue has a lot of information about businesses, and so it makes it reasonably easy for people to be able to do those investigations. Everyone who applies for the scheme will have to declare that they are a viable business, and there will be an audit process that follows on from that.
Okay. Over what time frame will this loan be available?
So at this stage, our intention is to have the scheme open for 1 month for applications, but we will review that before the end of that month to see how the scheme is rolling out and whether there is a need for it to be available and open any longer than that.
How much money have you put aside for it?
Obviously, it will depend upon the number of businesses who apply for it. We've got around 400,000 small and medium enterprises in New Zealand, and many of them have taken up the wage subsidy scheme. So the amount of money that we need will be dependent on that.
So, Jenna, how high is the risk that small businesses will default on those loans?
Well, obviously we would want to see as many small businesses as possible repay, but there is a risk that for some of them they may not be able to come through the other side of COVID-19 and be able to pay this debt. So we'll factor that in to our calculations about what it is, what's the fiscal costs as we would describe it, but we would be hopeful that many businesses will be able to pay us back.
Are you comfortable taking on that amount of risk on behalf of small business?
Look, I think it's really important to get the balance right here. This is a loan scheme. People have to pay it back. It does have an interest rate attached to it, a 3% rate with a maximum term of 5 years. But if it's paid off in the first year, it's interest free. So I think we've got the balance right here between a scheme that will get money to those small and medium enterprises as quickly as possible, but it's been delivered in a responsible way.
What do you say to those businesses who may perhaps already have taken a loan with the bank and are now looking at these comfortable interest rates that the government's offering and saying, gosh, I wish they had brought that out sooner so that I didn't already sign up to something that's going to cost me a lot more in the long run? Well,
Obviously those businesses will take the time to consider whether this scheme is one that they want to draw down upon, and how that matches with any other debts that they might have or whatever their needs are. But the scheme is available as long as you can meet the criteria, which are effectively the same criteria as the wage subsidy scheme, along with you making a declaration that you are a viable business. Then the scheme is open to those businesses as it is to all other small and medium enterprises, yes.
Minister, is New Zealand going to support Taiwan's resumption as an observer member of the World Health Organisation?
Well, that's a matter that I'd need to get some advice on from both the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and from the Ministry of Health, so I can't answer that question for you today.
Support Australia's call for an inquiry into the origins of COVID-19 and whose response to it?
Oh, look, I think like all nations, New Zealand is very focused on making sure we get our response right here in New Zealand, that we look after the people of New Zealand. We are very interested in the origins of COVID-19 because it helps explain to us what we need to do to respond to it. Yes, Colette. Yes. I'll just take Colette in front of you, thanks.
After the US has withdrawn funding?
Thanks, Colette.
Do government agencies, ministries, health authorities, etc., have the freedom to make comments on COVID or respond to questions on COVID, or do they have to go via ministers' offices?
Well, it will depend a lot on what the question is. I mean, if it's something that involves a minister's office or a particular issue that a minister has been commenting on, it would be the normal practice around information. We clearly have the no surprises policy that is operates across government, but you'd need to give me a specific example if you've got one.
Say that chief executives of, say, ministries are muzzled in any way from talking to the public about COVID.
Well, just be the normal arrangements that we have. I mean, obviously, chief executives have responsibilities for their departments. You know from the work that you do normally that it's ministers who generally front to the media about particular issues. It'll very much depend on the circumstances of the issue.
Will domestic tourism be allowed under Alert Level 2?
As I just said before, we are looking again at Alert Level 2 and the rules that sit behind that. We want to make sure that we continue to balance the importance of public health with getting the economy going again, and Cabinet will be making its decisions about that over the coming week.
To say without it, thousands of jobs will be lost. If they can operate safely, why shouldn't they be able to cater to domestic tourists?
Well, that's the very point, is we need to make sure that whatever happens is done safely and upholds the public health guidelines of Alert Level 2. The work that Cabinet's now going through is to assess what can and can't happen in detail under Alert Level 2. And we'll have a lot more to say about that next week.
At the high level, because the existing advice is avoid all non-essential travel that's interregional, but these guys are calling out for domestic tourism. You guys heard it firsthand before we went into lockdown. You've been hearing it throughout, so lend them a bit of certainty and clarity.
Well, exactly, that's what we will provide, that certainty and clarity as we work through the detail of what Alert Level 2 looks like. We do know that travel has been an issue in terms of transmission of the virus, and so we have to make decisions that uphold our public health guidelines, but we absolutely understand that for domestic tourism particularly, that's the lifeline for the tourism industry. We'll be making those decisions over the coming week. Yes, down the front.
Yeah, sorry, just a follow from Toby's question there. So does that mean that there will be more, so the rules around Alert Level 2 will be released next week to give businesses more of an idea of what's coming?
Look, just as we've done as we move towards Alert Level 3, we spend a lot of time as a government getting exact clarity on what the rules will be at Alert Level 3. We need to do the same thing for Alert Level 2. We've put out high-level guidance, but as the Prime Minister said yesterday, we're reviewing that guidance to make sure that it both meets our public health guidelines and allows economic activity to the extent that we possibly can. Those decisions will be made and announced in the very near future.
Is New Zealand going to send any more repatriation flights to India?
I don't have any information about that with me today, Craig, but I do know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade continues to work with New Zealanders overseas to do what they can to support them to return. We've obviously had a number of people come back from India and a number of flights, and I know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials in India continue to do everything they can, but I don't have specific information about that.
Just on March 25, which is quite a fateful day for this government now, you put the idea of a universal basic income on the table, or you said it was on the table. Does it remain on the table?
I've said before that the really important thing when it comes to stimulus in the economy is getting the timing of that right. Right now, when we're in level 4 and level 3, stimulus packages will only have a limited amount of effect. What we want to do is make sure that we're planning for the medium and long term for New Zealand, and so we will be looking at all the options that are available to continue to support New Zealanders to both make ends meet, but also be part of an economy that grows. Those decisions have not been made, so it's not a matter of saying something is on the table or off the table. We're just considering all of our options at this time.
Yes. And a second issue.
Have you did you consider raising the level of bank guarantee on the existing, or government guarantee on the existing loan scheme from 80% to 100%?
Well, we're continuing to have a look at what's possible in terms of the Business Finance Guarantee Scheme. The tweaks that we've made today address some of the feedback that we've had, particularly around the General Security Agreement requirement. We're also making some changes for access to particular types of businesses, so we're bringing farm lending into that scheme, which wasn't at the beginning, and we're looking at some other changes in the future to make sure the scheme operates well. So I'll have a bit more to say about that. I think what we've got now is a situation where we're very aware of those small and medium enterprises, 50 FTEs or less. These are the people who, as I said, often have their own personal finances involved. We needed to create a scheme that meant that they could get access to working capital to pay the rent and pay their other bills. The Business Finance Guarantee Scheme is more towards the medium enterprise end, and we're tweaking that to make sure it works as well as it possibly can.
On those clusters that were are close to being closed, or one has been closed, can you give us detail on which clusters they were, and is that an encouraging sight that we are able to see 28 days without any new cases in some instances?
Yes. I need to check on the website to see if that's signalled on the website, because that's where we're posting details of the clusters. It's very encouraging. We've determined that a cluster would be officially closed when you've got a 28-day period from when the last case was reported. And so the fact that that's what we're seeing with more and more of these clusters is extremely encouraging, and we do expect to be able to close off the other clusters.
At which point, going forward, maybe in the next week, will we know if level 3 is working? If we have, are we looking, because there's a 2-week transmission period, obviously, so when will you be looking at our case numbers and things, and will we know that Kiwis are obeying the rules and we're not spreading COVID-19 during level 3?
Well, we're continuing to look at the case numbers every day, and provide that advice to government as to what the cases are telling us. It's a mixture of it's looking really good. We've got very low case numbers, but at the same time, we are seeing cases being reported. So it just reminds us that we do have to be cautious. And we will continue to be doing that for the next period that we're in level 3 in order to be able to provide advice as to what level 2 might mean.
And it's just important to remember that, you know, the key thing here is to break the chain of community transmission. We do not have evidence of widespread community transmission in New Zealand, so that is something that we should all be encouraged by. But as we see the cases come in, we continue to look closely at them, to understand everything we can about them. And as we did when we were moving from level 4 to level 3, we want the most up-to-date information to inform the government's decision about that. That's the information that we get provided every day by the Ministry of Health. And so while the signs remain and continue to be encouraging, we will be making that decision with the most up-to-date information that we can get. I'll just come down the front here where there was
and extra people receiving main benefits in the last week. You know, what do you make of those numbers, and how much further can we expect that balloon, I guess, to bubble out?
Well, as I said last week when we were talking about this, it's extremely distressing for every single New Zealander who loses their job and finds themselves in the situation of going on the job seeker benefit. What we're doing is attempting to limit that as much as possible, and the wage subsidy scheme has done a great job of that. But we've been very clear from the start, the impact of this crisis will be more significant than the global financial crisis, and that did see unemployment rise sharply as well. What we have to do is work closely with all New Zealanders to support them not only to stay in work, but be able to retrain, to get new jobs and new skills, and support the sectors that will provide those. That will be a focus within the budget.
On Wednesday, Dr Bloomfield urged all New Zealanders to get their flu shots, saying vaccines were widely available. However, a PHO that represents hundreds of doctors in Auckland has told its members that on advice of the Health Ministry, vaccine stock will likely run out again next week. Why are you giving what appears to be misleading information to the public?
We've seen a fantastic response to the influenza immunisation programme this year, and we've given out more vaccines than have ever been distributed. We continue to get more vaccine coming into the country, but there has been a request from the sector, as well as information that we've provided to the sector, that if there are any potential for any delay in receiving vaccines, that the sector have that information. So there was information that was given out to the sector to say we are working with Pharmac to get the vaccine out there. We will get you the vaccine that you need, but be prepared that you may not have that vaccine at the time that you actually are planning to use it. So that was a specific request from the sector, that they have that heads up. But we do know that we've got more vaccine coming in, and we're hoping that then there won't actually be any issue with any delay.
Just to be really clear about that, there are 700,000 vaccine doses around the country that have not yet been administered. So they are in the community. There is availability of flu vaccine. As at last week, 587,000 people had been vaccinated. That compares to 290,000 people on the same date in 2019. So with those 700,000 vaccines still available in the community to actually be administered, we are confident that we have the supplies we need. We've already vaccinated far more people than we would have in the past. What the communications that are coming through from the Ministry of Health indicate is that there is more vaccine on the way, and we're asking
again next week. It's not necessarily just that it's...
Well, the communications we've had from the Ministry of Health are that there are 700,000 vaccines out there. There are more on the way. That's simply a piece of information to the sector around the way in which the vaccines have already been delivered into the communities and what will be coming in the future.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, this PHO is saying they will likely run out again next week. That was the advice from the Ministry of Health. So how can Dr Bloomfield argue that they're widely available?
Well, because they are widely available, because there are 700,000 vaccines in the community. What this is about, as we've discussed on quite a few times at these press conferences, is around the distribution within a DHB. And clearly, if there is a particular PHO that's saying this, then we need to be talking to that DHB about how those doses that are already out there can be administered.
One GP we've spoken to has cancelled 50 flu jab bookings for next week due to the uncertainty. Is that good enough, and doesn't that just reaffirm the position that the Medical Association, from the Medical Association, that the National Flu Campaign has been a complete debacle?
No, I don't accept that at all. When you've got a situation where you've got 587,000 people being vaccinated compared with 290,000 at the same time last year, that actually represents a campaign that is out there and is working. Clearly, we need to continue to ensure that the distribution chains within our health system work well, but I actually think with that level of vaccination and a commitment that more is coming, we are continuing the kind of campaign that New Zealanders would expect. Thomas, we haven't had you.
Dr McElnay, just a question from our newsroom. Have you got an update on the number of suicides that have occurred since lockdown? And if so, what is the policy regarding testing them for COVID-19? And is there a policy in terms of mental health checks on vulnerable patients during the alert levels?
I don't actually have information specifically around suicides, but we can provide that information for you. What I can say, though, is that as part of our surveillance strategy to make sure that we're identifying and capturing any COVID-19 infections that might be out there, that any sudden deaths that occur in the community that are subject to a coroner's inquiry, that testing for COVID occurs if it is felt that that person could have died as a result of that. So that's an extra piece of information that we have to tell us about COVID-19 out in the community.
I just have a question in terms of the business finance guarantee scheme. How much more risk are taxpayers going to be exposed to by removing that requirement to have a general security agreement? And do you expect that even if that requirement is removed, banks will still have a requirement themselves and take some security from businesses?
Well, at this time, our risk remains the 80% risk that we announced at the beginning. We've been clear that what we wanted from the scheme was for viable but vulnerable businesses to be supported. Clearly, there are some businesses that banks won't support, and we mentioned that at the start, for example, those who are on the watch list. But what we wanted from the scheme was for banks to apply it in such a way as that businesses that perhaps they might have not processed previously, they would, as long as they were still viable. In terms of what they will now do, that we've removed the requirement for the General Security Agreement, it will still be up to banks, but as I said at the start, we're continuing to look at further tweaks to the scheme.
Have we told you though, in terms of the extra risk that taxpayers are taking on? If if a business collapses, then taxpayers might not be able to take that business owner's house, which I know it's an unfortunate and horrible situation, but you no doubt have to balance taxpayer risk as well as
bear in mind the schemes are being delivered by the banks, so in the end it remains up to the bank to make decisions about what kind of security they will take on. But what we're saying is the government is not requiring that in terms of our 80% underwriting, but we're not in a position of being the people who look at a particular type of security. I do think it's really important. It is one of the reasons why we have put in place today the small business loan scheme, is because we want those smaller businesses, many of whom often are financed off the back perhaps of a second mortgage on their home, to get support that does not require them to concern themselves about that. And if they can pay it back within a year, it's interest free. It's about cash flow for those small businesses that play such a big part in our economy.
I have a slightly indelicate question on behalf of Polly. So thousands of people have been going to the beach, but councils have been told to keep toilets closed, which has seen people relieving themselves in the sand dunes. Can you please clear up the messages around allowing regional travel to beaches, but not opening facilities to cope with that?
Well, I think we probably go back to the beginning here, that people need to show a sense of personal responsibility. I think we all know what's right and wrong when it comes to relieving oneself at the beach. In terms of a general comment around what people should be doing, we continue to want them to stay close to home. Under level 3, there has been some relaxation to allow you to travel within your region, but that is for short-term recreation. It's also to make sure that there are some further options available for people, but the first and best preference is to stay local. I could say some other things, but I won't.
And mortgage brokers are warning that...
Sorry, we're just down the front. We'll come up to you, Jen.
Thank you. Minister, Lawyers for Climate Change have written to you and other ministers. They're worried that the shovel-ready projects criteria doesn't address things like gas emissions and effects on climate change, which they're warning could be unlawful. What assurances can you give to them that that is being considered in future decisions being made on these projects?
So the decisions on what projects we adopt will be made by Cabinet, and Cabinet will be operating under the plans that we've already announced. And one of the core ones of those is the importance of a transition to a low carbon economy. So the decisions we make will be supportive of those goals that the government has had from the beginning. And we showed that with our New Zealand Upgrade program, which had a mixture of projects that, yes, did include some roading projects, but it included rail. It included getting rid of some of those boilers in our schools and our hospitals. It includes cycling. It includes walking projects. So that's a sign, I think, you can see of the fact that when we think about infrastructure, we have in mind all of the things that matter. Creating jobs, making sure we can transition to that low carbon environment, growing productivity and keeping the economy moving. We continue to balance those in our decisions about the infrastructure projects.
And just a question from our regional reporters. They've had specific plea from West Coast mayors that they want to be allowed to go into level 2 sooner. What do you say to them, because they're really struggling there at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important that we continue to stay the course on level 3. New Zealanders know the great gains we made in level 4, and we need to lock those in through level 3, and that's been because as a country of 5 million people we have decided collectively that we're all in this together. And so I can understand in communities like the West Coast they're saying we want to get on with it. We all do, but we've got to stay the course in level 3. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, we haven't ruled out the possibility in the future that there could be regional differences, but for now, this is something that we're all in together. And, you know, I also do bear in mind that, and I'm sure the mayors of the West Coast understand this, our very first death from COVID-19 was from someone on the West Coast. So I think it's a reminder for all of us that this virus can spread and spread easily, and that means that we have to stay vigilant under level 3. Jenna.
RNZ and mortgage brokers are warning more New Zealanders will default on their loans like mortgages in the coming months. Are you concerned about that?
Oh, I'm very concerned for all New Zealanders that they have the resources to be able to pay their mortgages, and that's why one of the very early things that was agreed with banks was the mortgage deferral scheme. It's why we're continuing to provide a range of support through the tax system, through the small business cash flow support we announced today. So, you know, this is a situation where there's going to be a big impact on the New Zealand economy, but the government is doing all it can to support people to be able to pay their bills like their mortgages.
Given any forecasts on the number of defaults and the financial cost of it, and are you offering any help to banks to cover those losses?
Well, obviously the Business Finance Guarantee Scheme is a significant contribution from the government to carrying risk for those loans. The banks have very strong balance sheets in New Zealand, and while they're under pressure like all companies are, they are making arrangements with their customers right now for interest-only payments, for deferral of mortgage payments. I don't have specific information about the particular impacts of that, but we all know that this is an economic shock that's going to affect a lot of New Zealanders.
Another slightly random question from a colleague.
The day for it.
That there's a company down south who is creating T-shirts, and they've actually got Dr. Bloomfield's face on it with the words "Curve Crusher." They're using it for charity though. $50,000 has actually been raised for Women's Refuge. What do you think about this innovative idea, and would you consider buying one?
Well, I think, you know, it's fantastic that New Zealanders in a time of crisis like this are raising money for a cause like Women's Refuge, and I think we should all be really proud of the fact that, you know, in a time of crisis people come together like that. I'm very conscious of the fact that Dr. Bloomfield has become somewhat of a cult figure in New Zealand, and from time to time that means you end up on T-shirts and tea towels and so on. At this stage, I haven't found the website address to make that order, and I'd have to make sure they had the right sizes available as well. Craig.
Dr. McKelvey, just a question on health workers with COVID-19. I think it was last weekend there was a nurse at Burwood that was recorded as positive. Do we have any details yet on how they got it?
I don't have those details to hand, but those are certainly situations where we investigate fully to find out how they might have been exposed to the virus.
Is there a timeline on the current investigation out of Waitemata and how long you expect that might take?
Oh, well, we expect to get a further update later today. As I said, the first case was notified over the weekend, so there was some initial investigation that happened there. Then there was a case yesterday and then again today. So there's been extensive further testing, and we expect to get further results either today or tomorrow.
We'll just take a couple more, Ben.
Minister, now that the final details around the Cannabis Legislation and Control Bill have been released, will you be voting for it?
At a personal level, yes, I will be in the referendum. That's a decision I've held, a decision and a position I've held for a very long time. But this is a personal choice for New Zealanders, and what the release of the bill means is we're at the next stage of New Zealanders being able to make up their mind on it. One thing I would say, and this is a personal view, is for me it is not the most important issue that's facing New Zealand or facing me. And while I have a moral stance on it, I'm one individual. Now's the opportunity for New Zealanders to understand the bill. There will be a large public education campaign run about it, which will enable people to understand it as much as possible.
Sorry, have you seen public polling that puts Labor at 55% at the moment?
I'm not interested in polls at all at the moment, Tova.
On that though, you and our corporate poll results have been...
Could be the same answer coming your way, but yes.
Well, maybe if you could respond to the National Party on this, because the poll results for them are 29%, and the National Party, Simon Bridges, is saying Labor should focus on getting New Zealand back to work, not leaking dodgy numbers. What's your response to that?
Well, we are focused completely on making sure that we support New Zealanders through COVID-19, and I'm very, very confident the poll coming into the public arena had nothing to do with the Labor Party.
Sound like the National sound like dodgy numbers to you?
I'm just not interested in polls at the moment, Thomas.
Listen, just a question from our newsroom. You will have seen the pictures of more than 100 people at a tangi in Canterbury. What would you expect police and health authorities to do about it, particularly in light of the fact that local police are saying they're reluctant to police a tangi?
Look, I think everybody will understand just how difficult this issue is. For all of us, we're going to have people in our lives who we know who potentially are going to be facing the loss of a family member or a friend at this time, and it's incredibly hard. We've put the rules in place we had around limiting people who go to tangi or who go to funerals for good public health reasons. In the particular case that's here, the family said about having a tangi with only 10 or fewer people attending, and it blew out to a larger number. That's really disappointing. These rules have been put in place in consultation with groups within the Māori community in particular, and so we just, we urge people in really difficult circumstances to stick to the rules here, and I'm sure the police will take a compassionate approach, but the rules are the rules, and people do need to stand by them.
So I just have another question on the business finance guarantee scheme.
My favourite topic, Janae. So
yes, I love it. Will agricultural businesses be able to get loans under the scheme? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. So that's the change that we made. And initially they were taken out of the scheme because it was felt by the banks and ourselves that they were dealt with through other products that the banks might have. But we think in order to make the scheme as valuable as possible, it's time to open up to those businesses. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.